There is a specific taste to humiliation. It doesn't taste like ash or bile, as the poets say. It tastes like lukewarm potato soup in a diner that hasn't passed a health inspection since the Reagan administration. I sat in the corner booth of Dino's Diner, my back against the cracked red vinyl that was held together with strips of silver duct tape. I am Silas Vance. To the world, and more importantly to the two people sitting across from me, I am 70 years old, broke, and irrelevant. I was wearing a flannel shirt that I bought at a Goodwill store in 1998. The elbows are worn through, the fabric soft and thinning like my patience. My boots, heavy work steel toes, were tucked under the table, caked in dried mud from a walk I didn't need to take, but took anyway, because it fit the character. Across the table sat my legacy, my son, Robert, and his wife, Angela. They looked like they had been cut out of a magazine and pasted into the wrong collage. Robert was wearing a suit that shimmered under the flickering fluorescent lights, Italian silk, likely tailored, costing more than the car I pretended to drive. Angela was draped in cashmere, her fingers heavy with rings that caught the light and threw it back with an arrogant glare. They were eating steak frites, the most expensive item on the menu. I was eating the soup of the day because 10 minutes ago, Robert had patted his pockets with a theatrical frown and announced he had left his wallet in the Tesla. "Shoot," he had said, not looking sorry at all. "Dad, can you cover this?" He wouldn't. He never did. And he knew that the $40 in my pocket was my grocery budget for the week, or at least he thought it was. "This steak is rubbery," Angela complained, sawing at the meat with a serrated knife. She didn't look at me. She rarely looked at me. To her, I was part of the scenery, like the ketchup bottles or the napkin dispenser, functional but easily ignored until needed. "Robert, remind me never to come here again." "It's cheap, Ang," Robert said, his mouth full, "and it's close to Dad's place." My truck, a 1995 Ford F-150 that I deliberately kept rusted. It ran perfectly, the engine purring with parts I machined myself, but the body looked like it had lost a fight with a salt truck. I asked, trying to bridge the gap. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to hear passion. "Fine," he said, dismissive. "Bonus season is coming up. Should be big this year." "That's nice," I said quietly. "Busy," she sighed, checking her phone. "The gala is next month. I need a new gown, and the kids need tutors. Private school is getting ridiculous, Silas." I didn't have an idea because I wasn't allowed to see my grandchildren. I was the embarrassing grandfather, the one who smelled like mothballs and poverty. They didn't want their high society friends seeing the man who supposedly scrubbed floors for a living. I took a sip of my soup. It was watery and lacked salt. I watched them eat, a slow ache spreading in my chest. It wasn't hunger, it was grief. I had raised Robert to be kind. I had taught him to fish, to change a tire, to look a man in the eye. I had worked 18-hour days to put him through college so he wouldn't have to break his back like I did. And somewhere along the line, the education I paid for had educated him right out of his humanity. Robert wiped his mouth with a paper napkin, crumbling it into a ball. The small talk was over. I could feel the shift in the air. The temperature at the table dropped. "Dad," Robert said, leaning forward. He put on a face I recognized. It was his serious business face, the one he used when he was trying to sell something worthless to someone desperate. My heart gave a traitorous little leap. A foolish old man's hope flared in the darkness of my chest. Were they finally going to ask me to move in? Were they going to offer me the guest cottage? I didn't want their charity, but I wanted their company. I wanted to know my bloodline before I died. "The apartment above the laundromat," Angela interjected, wrinkling her nose. Well, Silas, it's embarrassing. People talk. They know who Robert is, and then they see you living there." "I like it there," I lied. "It's a hovel," Robert said bluntly. "But that's not the point." I asked, "We're buying the estate on Harrow Hill," Angela said, her eyes suddenly gleaming with a predatory light. "The old Vanderbilt place. You know the one. The iron gates, the 12 bedrooms, the ballroom." I knew the house. Everyone knew the house. It was the crown jewel of the city, a sprawling mansion that had sat empty for 3 years. It was listed at $6 million. "That's a lot of house for 3 people," I said. "It's $6 million," Robert said, waving his hand as if $6 million were 6 cents. "But it's going to put us on the map, Dad. It's a statement." "That's wonderful, son," I whispered. "Thanks," Robert said. He hesitated, glancing at Angela. She gave him a sharp nod. "The thing is, Dad, with the new house and the social calendar we're going to have." The hope in my chest died, strangled in its crib. I asked. "It's a high society neighborhood," Angela said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The HOA is very strict. And, well," she gestured vaguely at my flannel shirt, my taped boots, my rough hands. "You don't fit the aesthetic. You'd be uncomfortable." Explaining me. I was a glitch in their brand. "So, we found a solution," Robert said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a glossy trifold brochure. He slid it across the sticky table. It stopped next to my bowl of cold soup. I looked down. The text was cheerful, printed in bright yellow font over a picture of elderly people staring vacantly at a television. Shady Acres State Facility. I knew this place. It wasn't a retirement community. It was a warehouse for the indigent. It was where the state sent people who had no money, no family, and no future. It was a place where the hallways smelled of urine and bleach, and the residents sat in wheelchairs facing walls, waiting for the clock to run out. "It's affordable," Robert said, misinterpreting my silence. "The state subsidizes it, so it won't cost us anything. You'll have friends." "You want to put me in a state home," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled beneath the table. "We can't afford the mortgage and your upkeep, Dad," Robert said, his voice taking on a whining edge. "You have to be realistic. You have no pension, you have no savings, you're dead weight." I looked at the brochure. Then I looked at my son's manicured hands. He thought he was putting a pauper in a home. He didn't know he was talking to the man who could buy his bank and turn it into a parking lot. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should love you most, hit that subscribe button. You need to see what happens when the poor relation finally opens the vault. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I didn't reach across and slap the arrogance off his face, though God knows my palm itched to do it. I simply folded the brochure with precise, deliberate movements and placed it in the breast pocket of my flannel shirt right over my heart. "I understand," I said. Robert let out a breath he had been holding. "Great, I knew you would get it." He stood up, buttoning his silk jacket. "We have to run. Angela has a fitting. You good here?" "I'm good," I said. "Thanks, Dad." They walked out of the diner without looking back. They didn't offer a ride. They didn't hug me. They stepped into the cool evening air, got into their least luxury car, and drove away toward a life they couldn't afford. I pulled a crumpled $5 bill and a handful of singles from my pocket. It was all the cash I had on me. I left it on the table for the waitress, Alice, who had 3 kids and a husband on disability. "Keep the change," I told her as I walked past the counter. I walked home in the rain. It was a 3-mile trek to the laundromat. The water soaked through my thin jacket, chilling my skin, but I welcomed the cold. It felt clarifying. It washed away the soup, the diner, the smell of my son's cologne. As I walked, my posture changed. The slight shuffle I adopted for Robert's benefit disappeared. My spine straightened, my stride lengthened. I wasn't an old man trudging home. I was a shark swimming through dark water. I reached the rundown brick building on 4th Street. The neon sign for Suds and Duds flickered rhythmically. I unlocked the side door and climbed the stairs to the studio apartment. Inside, it was sparse. A single bed, a hot plate, a table. It looked exactly like the home of a man who had lost everything. But appearances, as my son was about to learn, were deceiving. I locked the door and slid the deadbolt home. Then I knelt by the bed. I reached underneath and felt for the loose floorboard near the wall. I pried it up. Inside wasn't a stash of copper pennies or old letters. Inside was a pelican case. I pulled it out and set it on the wobbly table. I opened it. Inside sat a high-end laptop, a satellite phone, and a black leather ledger. I opened the laptop. The screen glowed, illuminating my face in the dark room. I typed in a password that was 64 characters long. The screen filled with numbers. I am not a janitor. I am not broke. I am the silent partner in 3 major tech startups in Silicon Valley. I hold 17 patents on industrial water filtration systems that are currently being used in 40 countries. My net worth is not measured in food stamps. It is measured in 8 figures. $80 million, liquid and invested. I hid it because I wanted to be loved for me, not my money. I hid it because I wanted to teach Robert the value of hard work, of struggle, of earning his way. I wanted him to build character. I failed. I didn't raise a man. I raised a wolf. And wolves only respect one thing. I spent the night digging. I didn't sleep. I accessed the public listing for the Vanderbilt estate on Harrow Hill. It was a foreclosure auction, sealed bids only, closing in 48 hours. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I accessed Robert's financials. I could do it because, in his arrogance and laziness, he had used my Social Security number 5 years ago to co-sign a loan he thought I had forgotten about. That link gave me a back door into his credit report. I scrolled through the data, and my heart hardened with every line. He was drowning. Credit card debt in the 6 figures. 2 mortgages on his current house. The leased cars were 3 months behind on payments. And the bid for the Vanderbilt estate. He was leveraging everything, and money he didn't have, to make a bid. He was using hard money loans with predatory interest rates. He was betting his entire existence on getting this house to maintain the illusion of success. He was willing to lock me away in a state facility to buy a mansion he couldn't afford. He loved the image of wealth more than the father who raised him. The grief washed over me again, heavy and suffocating. But this time it was different. It wasn't the grief of loss. It was the grief of resolution. I closed the laptop. The test was over. They had failed. Now it was time for the lesson. I picked up the satellite phone. I dialed a number in Zurich. It was 3 a.m. local time, but I knew he would answer. The line clicked. "Ah?" a cultured voice asked. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady, stripped of the old man tremor I used at dinner. "I need you to prepare the liquid assets." "What are we buying, Silas?" I looked at the brochure for Shady Acres lying on the table next to the laptop. I picked it up and dropped it into the trash can. "No," I said. The camera pans from the glowing laptop screen, showing a bank balance with too many zeros to count, to Silas's reflection in the window. The rain trails down the glass like tears, but his eyes are dry, hard, and terrifyingly focused. Fade to black. The next week was a performance. I played the part of the defeated, broken old man with a dedication that would have won me an Oscar if the audience wasn't just 2 greedy narcissists and a tired administrator. I let my shoulders slump. I let my hands shake when I signed my name. The administrator, a woman named Mrs. Gable, who looked like she hadn't smiled since the Clinton administration, showed us around. "This is the recreation room," she droned, pointing to a room with a single, flickering television and 3 mismatched sofas. And this would be your room, mister. She opened a door to reveal a space smaller than my studio apartment. It had 4 beds crammed into it, separated by thin beige curtains. The window looked out onto a brick wall. "Cozy," Robert said, checking his watch. "It's fine," I whispered, staring at the threadbare blanket on the bed nearest the door. I signed the preliminary admission papers with a trembling hand. I saw Angela smirk in the reflection of the glass door. They thought they had won. They thought the problem was handled, boxed up, and ready to be stored away so they could get on with their lives. But while I played the victim by day, I was the architect of their ruin by night. I met with Reginald 2 days later. We met in the back of a black limousine with tinted windows, parked 2 streets away from the laundromat so my neighbors wouldn't get suspicious. Reginald was the premier luxury real estate broker in the state. He was a man who knew the value of discretion almost as well as he knew the value of a square foot of marble. He was also the only person in the city, aside from my banker, who knew who I really was. "Silas," he said, shaking my hand firmly as I climbed in. The interior smelled of expensive leather and new money. "It's good to see you." "Camouflage, Reginald," I said, settling into the seat. Reginald opened a leather dossier and slid a sheaf of papers across the seat. "Your son has put in a bid," he said, his voice grave. "It's aggressive. He's offering $6.2 million. But the financing, Silas, it's a mess. He's using 3 different hard money lenders. The interest rates are predatory. If he doesn't get this house, he loses the deposit, $50,000. If he does get it, the payments will crush him within 6 months." I looked at the documents. I saw the desperation in the numbers. Robert was leveraging everything, his current home, his cars, his future earnings, to buy a status symbol he couldn't afford. He was building a castle on a foundation of quicksand. "He won't get it," I said, pulling a checkbook from my pocket. It wasn't the one I used at the grocery store. This one was bound in leather and carried the insignia of a private bank in Zurich. "I'm making a cash offer, $8 million, 30% over asking, immediate close." Reginald's eyebrows shot up. $8 million? "I'm not paying for the property, Reginald," I said, signing the check with a flourish that betrayed none of the tremor I feigned for my son. "I'm paying for the lesson." The seller accepts the offer immediately, but the identity of the buyer remains anonymous until the final walkthrough. I want Robert and Angela to think they won. I want them to stand in that foyer and believe they own the world. Reginald took the check. He looked at it, then at me. A slow smile spread across his face. "Consider it done," he said. Friday arrived with a crisp autumn chill that turned the leaves to gold and red. The sky was a piercing blue, the kind of day that makes you glad to be alive, or in my case, glad to be witnessing justice. Robert called me at 9 a.m. His voice was booming, full of the false bravado of a man who thinks he has cheated fate. "Dad, great news! We got the house. The seller accepted our bid. We're going to sign the final papers at the manor today at noon. Angela thought, well, we thought you should come, see what you're leaving behind." It was the ultimate cruelty. They didn't want me to share in their joy. They wanted to rub my nose in their success. They wanted me to see the palace I was barred from entering before they locked me in the dungeon. "I'll be there," I said. I dressed in my Sunday best, a suit I had bought at a thrift store 5 years ago. It was brown, polyester, and 2 sizes too big. The sleeves covered my knuckles. I looked like a child playing dress-up in his grandfather's clothes. I took the bus to Harrow Hill, sitting in the back, watching the houses get larger and the fences get higher as we climbed the elevation. The gates of the Vanderbilt estate were massive, wrought iron twisted into intricate vines, painted gold at the tips. They stood open, welcoming the new masters. Robert's leased Porsche was parked in the circular driveway, gleaming like a polished beetle. I walked up the marble steps. My boots scuffed against the stone. The front door was open. Inside, the house was a cathedral of excess. A crystal chandelier the size of a small car hung from the ceiling, fracturing the light into 1,000 rainbows. Velvet drapes pooled on the floor. The air smelled of lemon oil and old money. Robert and Angela were standing in the center of the grand foyer. They were holding champagne glasses, clinking them together. They looked like royalty. The real estate agents, Reginald and 2 of his associates, stood off to the side, looking uncomfortable. "Robert!" boomed when he saw me. His voice echoed off the high ceilings. He spread his arms wide, encompassing the room, the house, the world. "This is what success looks like. This is what you get when you have vision." Angela laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Don't be mean, Rob. He can't help that he's simple. At least he got to see it. It's a nice memory for him to take, too." "Shady Acres," Robert corrected her. He turned to Reginald. "All right, let's get this over with. I'm here for the signing. Where are the papers? Who is the seller?" Reginald stepped forward. He was impeccable in a charcoal suit. He didn't look at Robert. He didn't look at Angela. He looked past them, directly at me. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that silenced the room. "Actually, Mr. Vance," Reginald said, his voice cutting through the air like a knife, "the signing won't be necessary. The house has already been sold." Robert froze. The smile slid off his face like oil. "What? What are you talking about? We had the highest bid. We have the financing lined up." "The seller accepted a cash offer," Reginald said. "Immediate close." Robert dropped his glass. It hit the marble floor with a sharp crack, shattering into 100 glittering shards. Champagne splashed onto his Italian loafers. Who outbid us?" "You offered debt," I said. My voice was different now. It wasn't the raspy whisper of the old man in the diner. It was the voice of the boardroom. It was the voice that had commanded shareholder meetings and negotiated million-dollar contracts. It was deep, resonant, and absolute. I stepped forward. I shrugged my shoulders, and the oversized thrift store jacket slid off, pooling on the floor like a shed skin. Underneath, I was wearing a bespoke vest and shirt, tailored to perfection. The fabric was crisp, the buttons mother of pearl. I stood up straight, the old man's slouch vanishing as my spine locked into alignment. I grew 3 inches in front of their eyes. "You had loans," I corrected him, walking toward them. The sound of my heavy boots on the marble was gone, replaced by the confident stride of a man who owns the ground he walks on. Robert laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound, bordering on hysterical. He looked at me, then at the jacket on the floor, then back at me. His brain couldn't process the image. What are you talking about? You're senile. You clip coupons." "Reginald," I said, not taking my eyes off my son. Reginald opened the leather folder he was holding. He cleared his throat. "The property located at 1 Vanderbilt Drive is solely owned by the Silas Vance Revocable Trust." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical weight pressing down on us. I could hear the dust settling. Angela's face went pale, her makeup standing out like a garish mask on a corpse. Robert looked from me to Reginald, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He whispered, But how?" "I pretended to be broke," I said, stopping a few feet from them, "for 20 years. I wanted to see if you would care for me because I was your father, or if you only cared about what I could give you. I wanted to see if you had character, Robert." I reached into the pocket of my vest and pulled out a folded document. It wasn't a brochure for a nursing home. It was a legal notice. "I got my answer when you handed me a pamphlet for a homeless shelter and told me I was an embarrassment," I said. I tossed the document at his feet. It landed in the puddle of spilled champagne. "That is an eviction notice," I said. Angela screamed. The shock broke, replaced by a frantic, desperate panic. She rushed forward, grabbing my arm with her ring-laden fingers. "We didn't mean it. You misunderstood. We were just stressed. The market, the pressure. We love you, Silas. We can all live here. There's plenty of room. Think of the grandkids," I asked, looking down at her hand on my arm. I gently removed her hand. I dusted off my sleeve. "No," I said. "You wanted a status symbol? You're looking at it. I am the status." I turned to the two associates Reginald had brought. They weren't agents. They were private security. They stepped forward, their faces impassive. "Escort them out," I ordered. "No!" Robert shouted as the guards took his arms. "I'm your son." "I owe you nothing," I said. "I gave you life." As they were dragged screaming from the foyer, begging, crying, making excuses, trying to bargain with a man who had already closed the deal, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't happiness. It was the relief of a tumor being removed. It was the clean pain of surgery. I walked to the massive bay window that looked out over the city. I watched as the guards put them into their leased Porsche. I watched as Robert pounding on the steering wheel, screaming. I watched Angela sobbing into her hands. They weren't crying because they lost a father. They were crying because they lost a lottery ticket. They drove away, disappearing down the long, winding driveway. I turned back to the empty, beautiful room. The crystal chandelier sparkled above me. I was alone in a 12-bedroom mansion. But for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't lonely. I wasn't waiting for a call that would never come. I wasn't hoping for a scrap of affection. I had my dignity, I had my legacy, and I had the truth. The camera pans from Silas's weathered face, now calm and strong, down to the shattered champagne glass on the floor. A single diamond of light reflects off a shard of glass, brilliant and sharp. Fade to black.